Why Ukraine cannot be something like Austria? Nobody has any problem with that.
Well, Ukraine even said in March of this year will be something like Austria, in other words, neutral. And they started to negotiate on that basis and actually exchanged papers with the Russians based on Ukraine's neutrality. And the negotiations were making progress. And then one day the Ukrainians came and said, we stopped the negotiations. We can't continue. They told the Turkish mediators, we're taking a pause from the negotiations. That was late March, and until today, the negotiations did not restart. I don't know, though believe me, I've tried to find out why the negotiations broke off. Some people say, well, the Americans told them, don't continue. You don't have to accept this. You should defeat Russia. You can have everything. We don't know. That could be. Some people say Boris Johnson carried that message from the UK. I don't know. But what I do know for a fact is Ukraine walked away from the negotiating table. I think to its huge detriment, because between then and now, this has not been any favor to Ukraine. The cities have been reduced to rubble. Tens of thousands of soldiers have died. The dangers continue to escalate. 4 regions have been formally annexed to be part of the Russian Federation. In other words, nothing has gone in a proper direction. And, they say, well, we've recaptured part of the territory around Kharkiv. Yes, but God, the costs of what's happened since March are absolutely terrible. We should absolutely try to restart the negotiations and around the kinds of terms that were under discussion back in March.
But with the current rhetoric we have especially in United States, and we see that we have Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, 2014, 2015, and we have Putin in December 2021. He tried in February, they're invading Ukraine. In March, as you mentioned, they were trying to reach an agreement. They couldn't. But we see it continues the same. The rhetoric continues the same in the United States, in mainstream media, in US officials. We have Stoltenberg just last week said we have to defeat Russia. Russia cannot win. These are so dangerous statements. This world is so connected. We cannot say, "Oh no, we are not. We are not in Russia. We are not in Ukraine." No, it's not. It doesn't work
Of
like that.
course, absolutely. And Stoltenberg has not been at all prudent. What I think is possible after the U.S. elections, maybe there will come a moment at least for reconsideration. We don't know the results, but if the Republicans win one or both houses of the U.S. Congress, that's a defeat for the policies of this administration. And if it happens, which according to the opinion surveys, it's likely to happen, then I think the moment that happens, we need to have a debate in the United States that's more open, that this policy is not working. It's not working politically. It's not working militarily. It's not saving Ukraine. It's not making the world safe. And so maybe even as early as next week, there will be a chance to revisit this issue.
And why did the U.S. choose to confront Russia instead of negotiating? Was it because of they wanted to trap and weaken Russia and then go after the containment of China? Was it the plan?
I think plan is something that is a too nice term for what our policymakers have in mind. In my view, people like Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan are exceptional people. That is, people who have been given to believe they are exceptional. They've attended the finest schools. They've been given the most wonderful privileges. They are precisely the same kinds of people that advised John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson to go into Vietnam because we were exceptional. The French couldn't beat these ragged, barefoot jungle people, but we are exceptional. We could. There was a book written about it. It's called The Best and the Brightest. So you'll have the direct descendants of those people. They come from the same Ivy League schools. They have no real experience. They never wore a uniform. They don't know what war is like. This is very dangerous, okay? Joe Biden, does he know what war is like? 5 deferments during Vietnam. How many did Cheney have? 5 deferments during Vietnam. Well, okay, nothing against deferments, but the fact is Joe Biden doesn't know what war is like either. Luckily, every Russian that was in on those discussions with Khrushchev 60 years ago on Cuba had been in World War II. That's big. The Russians, as your listeners may know, lost 26 million people plus in that war. Imagine that, 26 million people. Everyone, even today, has a relative, grandfather or so, that had the experience of real war at the hands of the Nazis, okay? So, deciding on Cuba, when Khrushchev said, look, we know what war is like. This guy Kennedy seems serious. It's not an existential threat for us. It's a political embarrassment to withdraw, but let's keep our heads screwed on right and get those missiles back home. And that was the decision. He didn't face any big backlash for that. They were sensible people. Now, there is a sense that's drummed into you if you're exposed to war. And unfortunately, the people that are now calling the shots in Washington have no concept of this. John Kennedy did. So did those around him. They had served. They knew what war was like. Not the same way that the Russians did, but they knew. Kennedy, of course, himself was in that PT boat. So this is a big difference, and it gives me great concern that these people who think we're exceptional and that the Russians are, well, you know, when I speak at universities very often, people ask about, well, do you think the United States of America is indispensable, like Madeleine Albright and other people, high statesmen have said? So I always say, well, what's, you know what a synonym is? And most of them say, yeah, that's a like word. They said, okay, well, how about an antonym? And one or two of them said, oh, yeah, that's an opposite word. So I asked them, okay, so what's the antonym for indispensable? And they stroked their chin, and usually one of them said, whoa, dispensable? I say, that's right. So if the United States is indispensable, by definition, all the other countries, Brazil, all the other countries, especially Russia, are dispensable. Now, there was a time where the United States could get away with that. That time has ended. The only problem is that these exceptional people don't realize that no longer are we indispensable. We're not even exceptional, except for the fact, and mark my words, this is very important, except for the fact that the world has now been divided into, people talk about multipolar world. Well, in a sense, they're quite right. But I look at it as a world not unipolar as it was ever since World War II with the U.S., the main pole, so to speak. It's bipolar. in both senses of the word, all right? In psychiatric sense as well. But in the geostrategic sense, it's bipolar because on the one hand, you have the lily white West, NATO. Look at them. They're all lily white. The closest you get to people of color is Turkey, okay? The lily white West against the rest of the world, primarily people of color. China? India? Iran? Argentina? Brazil? South Africa? So would our policymakers in their indispensable way say, Russia is isolated? Well, I hope they don't really believe that, but I have to allow for the likelihood that they do. Why? Because we're exceptional, we're indispensable. Russia is sort of like an Untermensch, pardon the expression. And of course, a lot of the Russians are people of color as well. So just to sum this up, it's a very dangerous situation we're in right now because what China and Russia call the collective West, which is lily white, is arrayed against the rest of the world, including not only China, India, Russia, and many other countries who are fed up with this unipolar thing. You can call it multipolar if you want. I call it bipolar.
Scott, we are connected. If you want it or don't want it, we are connected. You're living in Brazil, you're living in North America, you're living in Asia, you're living in Russia. We are all connected. We need peace. We need to come to a conclusion, to sanity.
But we need people willing to accept that. And unfortunately, rather than calling peacemakers strong people, we call them weak. We tend to call the war fighters, the people who support war, we call them strong. The reality is they're the weak ones. It doesn't take, it's a coward's way out to fight because it becomes a physical thing. It becomes brute strength. The heroes are the ones that take the hard path. Peace, negotiation.
This is the hardest decision that
it's the hardest thing in the world to get. Hardest thing in the world to get. And it takes a better man than most of the people out there to do it, a better woman. It takes a better person. But it takes a person of enormous internal strength. The easiest thing to do is to punch somebody in the face. Easiest thing in the world to do. The hardest thing is to not punch them, sit down and talk to them about why it is they feel the way they feel. And then have the courage to listen to their answer and then do something about it so that there isn't an altercation. That's real courage. That's real strength. But instead, we sit here and we lift weights and then we get all pumped up and you come at me and you say something, bam, I hit you in the face. And there was, oh, he's a tough guy. No, he's a coward. If I punch you in the face, I'm a coward because I didn't have the courage to confront you nonviolently, to ask you your opinion. I didn't have the courage to listen to you. I didn't have the courage to act on what you said. That's where courage comes from. A coward punches people. A coward invades countries. The strongest people sit down and talk. And people say, well, you just called Putin a coward. No. Putin tried to talk. He tried to talk a long time. From 2015 on, even prior to that. Minsk too. This war could have been stopped had they just signed the agreement. The draft treaties of December of last year. Read the things. Talk to Putin. Talk. You don't have to say, yes, we agree to everything Russia said here. Russia wasn't even demanding that. All Russia wanted you to do is read them and respond. Listen, talk. That takes courage. And nobody in the West had the courage to sit down with Vladimir Putin and have that conversation.
Because of the rhetoric all along have all the mainstream media they were Putinizing Russia and demonizing Putin, And you cannot,
Yeah.
go. It's a circle. It goes, spins around. You cannot take out of this circle.
So you have an election coming up. You have two
Yeah.
candidates running. Without saying anything about who you support, does either one of them represent all of Brazil?
No.
Can I ignore you and just deal with them?
Yeah,
Can I ignore the?
it's
Can I
divided.
ignore
The country
everybody?
is divided in two parts, basically equal parts.
But my point is, Brazil's more than either one of those two men.
Exactly.
Brazil is more complicated than that. Brazil is a diverse community of people who have different ways, different approaches, different values. And so why would I ever, if someone said, tell me about Brazil, why would I ever define it in terms of Bolsonaro or Lula? Why would I do that? They're nothing. They're temporary politicians. Brazil is forever. It's going to be here, after these guys are dead. So why would I ever simplify and actually insult Brazil by talking about their elected officials when Brazil is the Brazilian people? So why would Russia, what disrespect is there when you define Russia in the place and you say Vladimir Putin? Putin's Russia, Putin's Russia, Putin this, Putin that. I'm not denigrating Putin. I think history has shown he's one of the great historical figures of this century. I mean, the man's been in power for 22 years. So, 23 coming up. So, you can't dismiss that no matter how you feel about him. When the history books are written, his name's going to be playing a prominent role. But man, what an insult it is to Russia to say, Putin's Russia, Putin's this, Putin's that. What about Russia? What about the Russian people? Don't they count? Don't they stand for something? 158 million of them? Don't they count? Or is it just one man only? So that's the ignorance of taking that. Yes, you have to pay attention to Vladimir Putin. You can't ignore Vladimir Putin, or you do it at your own risk. But the best way to deal with Vladimir Putin is to listen to him. We go back to that speech he gave. What did he talk about? The Russian motherland, Mother Russia. So the best way to deal with Putin isn't as Vladimir Putin, the individual, but Vladimir Putin, the president of Mother Russia, of the Russian people. And if you take that and that whole approach, suddenly you see the ridiculousness of all these Putin whisperers out there who advise Joe Biden about, well, if you do this, Putin will do this. If you do this, Putin will that. Stop talking about what Putin's going to do. If you do this, this is how Russia's going to react. Boom. Because Putin feeds off of Russia. I mean, he's the president of Russia. He obviously cares about Russia. So you should focus on the whole entity of Russia. That's how you get Putin to respond. That would be my approach. He's not corrupted. You can't go in there and hand him a briefcase of money and expect him to do something. That's not how he works. He looks for the best interests of Russia. So talk to him about what's good for Russia. Not what I think is good for Russia. What does he think is good for Russia? Find out. Remember, sit down and talk to people. Have a conversation. Don't be afraid to listen and have the courage to act on what they tell you. Who's doing that with Putin right now? A lot of people are. You know who is? Xi Jinping. He has conversations with Putin. He listens to Putin. There's the Indian, Modi. He listens to Putin. There's a lot of people who listen to Putin. Not in terms of being dictated to by Putin, but having an actual conversation. Full conversation about what does Russia need? Not what does Putin need? What does Russia need? Because even Vladimir Putin looks in the mirror and realizes that in a day, hopefully for him longer away, but at some point in time, he ain't going to be president anymore. But Russia will still exist. And the policies that he's putting in place today will have an impact on the Russians that are living that long time. See, I think Putin actually believes this. He's not living for the moment. He's living for the long term, what's good for Russia. And so imagine how much impact you could have in having a conversation with Vladimir Putin about what's good for Russia long term. Not what can Russia do for me, but what can we do for Russia? And then I think Putin would turn around and say, what can we do for the United States? You know, how do we make what's good for America good for Russia? Where do we find points of commonality? How do we work together towards this common objective so that our grandchildren are raised in a world where the United States and Russia aren't talking about hitting each other with nuclear weapons, where there's no sanctions, where it's not a matter of embarrassment to have a Russian visa in your passport to visit. When you come back to the United States, you don't have to worry about customs officials going, oh, you went to Russia. Come back here in the room. We're going to rip through all your stuff. Tell us what you were doing in Russia. As opposed to, hey, you have a good trip? How was it? Moscow as pretty as they say it is? Yeah. Oh, man, good luck. Welcome back. That's the future I want for my grandchildren. I imagine that's the future that Russians want for their grandchildren. It could be a future you want for your grandchildren. Wouldn't you like, Brazil to live in a world where you didn't have to worry about, sanctions and stupidity and war, that you could just, I know it sounds utopian, but that's what multilateralism is. That's what Russia and China and Brazil and BRICS are trying to create. Not a utopia. We all know that humans suck. We know humans do bad things. And we're never going to get rid of war. We're never going to get rid of crime. We're never going to get rid of poverty. But we can try to minimize it. We can try to make it so that war doesn't dominate our life, that poverty doesn't infect, our society, that crime isn't rampant. And we can do that together. And that would be nice. That's what multilateralism is about. But when you have an American singularity, it's about the world revolving around America. And we're this giant black hole that just sucks everything good out of the world for us. And we leave you there with this festering cesspools and sewers and disease and all that. And we're not willing to help you because we only care about ourselves. That's not a good world. But that's the world we live in so long as America remains where it's at. I don't want my country to go downhill. I love my country. I want my country to be strong, powerful, but not in the way that we talked about in terms of punching people in the face. I want my country to be the guy that doesn't punch people in the face. I want my country to be the guy that sits down and talks to people, listens to people, works with them to solve problems. I want to be the problem-solving country. And we're good at that. We are good at solving problems. We put a man on them. So we can solve some problems if we apply ourselves. But in order to do that, I got to respect people. Russia respects people. I know they're going to, people, he invaded Ukraine. How could he possibly respect? Then you don't know anything about how we got involved in this conflict. You don't understand what's going on. You don't understand that Putin didn't want the Donbass to be invaded into Russia, that he struggled to keep Donbass part of Ukraine. And that Russia, throughout the 1990s, even though they viewed Crimea as Russian historically, were working with the Ukrainians under the understanding that Crimea was Ukraine. But that stops working when people try to punch you in the face, which is what the Ukrainians did in February 2014. They collectively punched Russia in the face. Well, you throw that punch, don't be surprised if you get punched back. Not too many people want to talk after they get hit.